Hey, welcome to the 180 podcast.
This episode of the 180 podcast, we have a very special guest. We have a alumni member from, I want to say 2013, Mustafa, maybe a bit earlier.
Yeah.
Mostafa Nejati, Dr. Mostafa Nejati. He is currently a strategy and policy manager at the Government of Alberta. He is also the star of his own YouTube channel, Momentum Consulting, which he'll tell us more about. Mustafa and I have known each other for almost 7-8 years now. We both worked at HSBC, one of his first jobs in Vancouver, I believe, right? First one or two jobs. I remember that chat we had on Granville Street. And I just gave him some advice. I don't know if it helped or not. You can tell me if it did, but he got the job and he did some great things there. So without further ado, let's welcome our guest, Mustafa. Welcome.
Hey, thank you, Paul and Nick, for the great opportunity. When Paul and Nick approached me and asked me and told me about the 180 podcast, I was just amazed by the idea and the initiative that the group has taken to start this podcast. And I must say, I feel humbled and grateful to have the opportunity to be part of this amazing show. A little bit of introduction, as Paul mentioned, I moved to Canada back in 2014, and I came here from Malaysia. I'm originally from Iran, but prior to that, I was living actually in Malaysia for several years. So when you move to a new country all over and have to start fresh, of course, that's one of the key things that was really important for me is the importance of building those relationships. So right off the bat, I tried to expand my network and get to know as many people, like-minded people in my field. And the crew was definitely one of the best things that happened to me when I moved to Canada. I had a chance to meet amazing people who were very supportive and like-minded, and got a lot of learning opportunities for me that way. As Paul mentioned, right now I work at the Government of Alberta and I live here in Edmonton. Nonetheless, my past several years here in Canada, I've dealt with different jobs and definitely worked my way up to the level that I'm right now. I'm managing a team of 6 and dealing with very interesting projects such as implementing an enterprise resource planning kind of a tool in the Government of Alberta for our 30,000 plus employees, which is quite exciting, and also providing change management support to our clients that we provide support for.
Oh my God, it sounds so amazing, right? Paul, you have something to add on?
No, I was just, I forgot you had moved around as well, Mustafa. So maybe just tell us a little bit more about like, why did you come to Canada in the first place?
Yeah, that's a great question, Paul. So the decision, obviously, to move to a totally new country is not an easy one, and it's one where you have to give a lot of thoughts. For me, I was living in Malaysia outside of my home country for several years. In fact, I moved to Malaysia to do my doctorate level studies there, and it was around 4 or 5 years. After I graduated there, I continued to work, but I always wanted to move to a country where I get to learn, I get to actually establish a more comfortable lifestyle. And Canada was one of my first picks. So the process was not an easy one. It took, I would say, close to 3 years for me to finally get my permanent residency and move to Canada. But I have not looked back ever since. I am definitely very proud to be a Canadian now. I'm a Canadian citizen and definitely call Canada almost my home. Of course, you always have your ties with your home country, that's for sure, regardless of how the situation is back there. Still, it's your country, but I love to be a Canadian. To answer your question as well, Paul, yeah, when I was here in Canada, I also moved quite a bit. Initially, I moved to Vancouver and I lived there for 2 to 3 years, but after that, there was an opportunity, life changed and I moved to Edmonton. Although it didn't work out the way I would have thought at the time, right now, I'm very happy with how things unfolded. I'm married here. I actually got married this year during the COVID year. So I guess that makes it even more memorable. Thank you. Yeah. So I've lived here in Edmonton for a couple of years now and quite like it, to be honest. But I do miss my friends back in Vancouver for sure.
No. I also got married during COVID, as you might know. And given how things aren't you glad that you kind of got that done with and like you can move on with other things? And
that's so true. Exactly. It's one of those things that you're so much looking forward to, and I think I agree with you. We are both my wife and I, we are so glad that we actually got married, although it was very small and got to celebrate it with our immediate family. Nonetheless, we're happy that we got to go through that, and we're actually husband and wife. But we are planning to still celebrate, hopefully, when the situation gets back to normal, sometimes in 2021. So we'll see how that
Nick, do you have anything to follow up with that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, thank you, to take us to your background and, make sure that we kind of know who you are, right? So that they know the context of your answers to, the following topics and everything, right? Because in this podcast today, right, what we're going to be talking about is going to be topics and themes surrounding the overall finance topic. I'm in that stage where finance plays a huge part in my life. Like I worry about it every day. And even though the situation is way better now, but I still think that there's a lot to be improved in terms of teaching finance and personal finance in a school environment and academic environment. Because somehow it's in a lot of areas and culture, it might still be a kind of like a taboo subject where people avoid talking about it because they think talking about money and finance will be damaging to the current relationships, right? So which is why today we just want to go over like that kind of tabooish thing, maybe some strategies to handle your personal finance better. We may even tip in the water the surface of things like investing.
Yeah, I must admit, ever since I got my first job, even this is back in my home country when I was 18, even back then, I tried actually to be very diligent about money. I guess how I learned about the importance of money back then was just observing my parents. I know how much of a tough life they had. They had to really work so hard to provide a living for us. When we bought our first home, when my parents bought their first home, I know how much it meant to them. And seeing them going through that, I really cherished those moments. And ever since I got my first job, like this is back in Bern, I was close to, I would say, 20 or 21st. I didn't start working too early, but even back then, I started really realizing how important it is and starting saving to some extent, not probably as great as it was. That said, I think my mindset about money was very much narrow. Like the limit of it was, okay, you make money, you make sure you save and just put it in the banks, which I'm going to probably talk later on. Probably that's not the best way you should be saving, because the banks are probably not always there to support you, judging by how the savings accounts pay, and probably the interest rates in Canada are very low. I think they're barely 1% at most at sometimes. So probably there are better avenues for a lot of people to actually invest their funds. Fast forward in Canada, even when I remember when I started opening my first account, as soon as I came to Canada, I opened my first banking account because it's so important. You want to make sure that you have a place that you can save, you can deposit your funds in. I remember when the bank teller was asking me, okay, so we can open a registered retirement savings plan for you here, an RSP account. I had no idea what that is, but because of they convinced me, I opened one. But when I was asked, okay, so there are different types of investing that you can put your money in, and you can deposit money every month. Would you like to be maybe, what's your risk tolerance? At the time, admittedly, my risk tolerance was very low. I was not willing at all to lose anything because, of course, you're just getting started. But over time, now that I reflect back on my journey, I wished I knew about the power of investing, and not just saving, but the power of investing, perhaps when I was that young, when I was maybe perhaps 18 or 20. I feel that I lost all those years. Nonetheless, it's better late than never. But if I had the chance to go back, I would have definitely 100% started to educate myself on investing back when I was 18 or 20, and started investing at that young age, because those are really your golden years when you look back at your journey of financial discipline.
Can I ask a quick question before we get to the rest of it? So in your 20s, so me and Mostafa are in our 30s now, right? So we've had our time to be silly and make some mistakes. What when you look at the purchasing decisions you made in your 20s, what was the biggest one you maybe not regretted, but like you felt like, man, I should have put this money towards something more? So what was that one purchase or two or type of purchases you did in your 20s?
That's a good question.
So I have one, but I'm a bit torn about mine.
Yeah, I have one, but I guess when you're young, and this is full disclosure, I've never mentioned it probably ever anywhere before. So I guess in
the power of the podcast.
Yeah, it's the power of podcast.
Transparency. I guess when you're young and you're going through, that your youth, of course, you meet your friends and you start, dating. And I think there's one thing that probably I learned is being aware of your expenses even at such a young age. Especially at that age, you're so excited, you want to just go out and spend, and it can really snowball really quickly. And I think if there's one thing that I would probably would have wanted to be more aware of is how much I spend at the time. And probably if I were more diligent about how much I spent, that would have probably been a better decision for me. Of course, you can't predict future. So you never know. At the time when you meet someone, you think they're the one and you're going to fall in love and you're going to get married. So of course, you want to dedicate as much as attention and perhaps resources to that relationship. But turns out that was not the right decision. So I regret that, but I think it comes with age at the same time.
So the lesson there, on dating, a girl or boy, I guess, be careful about how much you're investing into the relationship financially and making sure it's an actual investment. Okay. No, that's actually very honest. I mean,
take note.
If you're comfortable sharing it, what's the one thing that you
so
mentioned?
it's similar, but I was always a car guy. I did buy a convertible at 26, and I call it a quarter life crisis so that I could basically spend frivolously and have an excuse for it. So I took a loan out for this car. It was like $13,000. I had a staff loan, so it was kind of like, okay, I get low interest, and I had 2 cars, and I lived in downtown, right? So I had a Corolla that I kept because it was better on gas, and I had this convertible, and I lived downtown where parking is. It was just took up so much of my energy, not even financial energy, just energy, and the car was like hard to maintain and stuff like that. The why I say it's kind of interesting is because I also met my wife when I had the car. Now, I'm not saying that's the reason Cramer and I got together, but it just happened to correlate with each other. And I think after we started dating for 6 months, I sold the car, which maybe this is another question for you is there anything you sold or anything you did that, you should have kept? Because that car, that Honda I had, is a very rare car now. And I sold it at a loss to improve my cash flow. So I thought I was being smart, right? So I sold it. I had it for a year and a half, and I think I sold it for $1,000 or $2,000 less than I purchased it for, including tax. So I was like, I got some use out of it. I'm dating someone now, so in terms of a car to attract dates, it worked in that mindset. But at the same time, that car is now worth maybe double of what I sold it for. Wow. It was kind of like, if I spend that money on something else or saved it, I wouldn't be paying interest on it. At the same time, if I kept it, it would have been a solid asset to save. So that's my side story about my regret. Anything, Nick? You're young, but anything you regret buying?
Well, first of all, I mean, because of the tight budget I have and things I have to worry about daily and everything, like of course there haven't been any purchases that is as big as you guys did, right? In terms of amount. Wow. Actually, I don't have anything that I regret buying now. I'm doing right.
That's really good. But at the end of the day, I think the moral of the story is, being aware of what, like I think a lot of times it's talked in the topic of finance, being aware of what is things that we want and what are the things that we need. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't mean to say that you should never, ever buy something that you want because you don't need it. There comes a point in your life where perhaps you've built in a good emergency fund, you have your finances all together and it's all clear. So now you want to perhaps go and maybe spend something that really means a lot to you. Perhaps it's that your dream vacation, or perhaps it's going out to a restaurant or things like that, or perhaps buying even that car that really, it was your dream car. That's fine. At the end of the day, as long as you're comfortable that this is really the decision that you're making and you've considered what else you could do with that, and whether that's maybe delayed gratification. The concept of delayed gratification, sometimes if you wait on it, you might end up investing that perhaps funds and maybe getting a lot better return, and down the road in several years, you not only can you afford that car, but perhaps you can even buy other things that you wanted with it.
Yeah. I think it's just understanding why you're making your purchase decision and being able to live with it and doing that articulation in your head. So even if you make a bad purchase, you learn from it, or or maybe there's a future value that you're not aware of. Like I was unaware of that future value. I was just like, okay, it's costing me this much per month, and it's not very practical. So, right. But if I actually thought about it as an investment or like something I wanted to keep, like I had space in my parents' home to keep it and use it in the summertime. But I just kept thinking about like just the cost and not kind of the future value of the investment. Usually cars aren't investments, right?
Usually not.
But the thing is, I bought a unique car and didn't even think about it. I didn't even think about that as an investment. So yeah, Nick, tell me.
Yeah, because like my ideal dream car is like to go into a Tesla place and just buy a Tesla outright. But that's in the far future. But just touching on what you've been talking about so far, because one of my strategies is actually to create like a wish list. To be honest, I've always felt urge to buy certain stuff at a certain time, especially during last Black Friday or Christmas is coming, or even on my birthday, right? Like, hey Nick, like why don't you just treat yourself? Like just buy this stuff, right? You're young, right? You can always make money later, right? Just buy this stuff, and who knows, you might be really happy with it. So sometimes I feel like that, and it might be a really truthful feeling. The object, the product might actually bring me a lot of value and happiness, right? But I wanted to factor in my brain and not just my heart. So I always create a wish list, leave it there for like at least 30 days. If I still want it, then I just go out and purchase it.
We're going a little bit off topic, but just one last point about this consumerism and like kind of what you spend your money on. What I've actually looked at now is, I don't know if you'd agree, Mostafa, when I buy things, I buy slightly higher quality in case I want to resell it. Because the residual value of what I buy now is important because, like Nick said, I change my mind or things might change. So residual value of high-end purchases is much, and now because with Facebook Marketplace and all these different avenues to resell your products, it doesn't have to always all be junk, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I know.
Can you give me an example of what items you're thinking? Maybe
okay. I'll give you an example right here. It's right in front of my face. It's this Blue Yeti.
Okay.
This microphone. Mm-hmm. So I bought it used, and I was between buying a very cheap mic just to get started, right? To buy some other versions, and they're all kind of the same quality. But I decided on the Blue Yeti because it's a known brand. It's reliable. It's now bought by Logitech, actually. They own the Blue brand. For the last 10 years, it's pretty much been the same device at the same price. So the retail price has been pretty similar. There's not a lot of innovation and like evolution in the microphone space, really. Other than the fact that some new microphones use a USB-C. This uses an older USB, but the sound it's about the condenser, right? But one of the major purposes why I bought this over another brand was because if I put this on Facebook Marketplace, people know what Blue Yeti is, right?
The brand.
And after using this for 6 months, if I don't want to use it anymore, I can probably get the same price back. And that's what I told Nick, and that's why Nick has one.
Yeah, I bought a used one.
He bought a used one too. So Nick, you can probably sell that for the same price or more.
It came with a boom arm.
Yeah.
Heads up.
That's actually a good point, though. Like you're trying to pick items that obviously you need. In this case, you're using it for the podcast, but at the same time, you're trying to be kind of cautious about whether it's going to lose its value right off the bat. And that's why I think what I really liked about this whole concept, and you told me, is the fact that you actually didn't even go and buy a necessarily brand new one, because the used one is still giving you the same quality, but you're getting it for a discount. And that's, to be honest with you, something that I always love. One concept that I would probably want to socialize here is the fact that a lot of times, especially if you want to change your mindset, how you're going to approach different products or different items that you perhaps buy or invest in, is thinking about what value does it bring for you. So, there are different asset class out there. Like by asset class, I mean different avenues where you can invest in or you can try to explore. Imagine if you buy a car, the moment you drive off the car, drive the car off the lot, it's just going to lose its value right away. Probably 20% of the value is gone. And for the most part, it's one of those items where it depreciates in value, right? Whereas, for example, stock market, if it's selected carefully, for the most part, over years, over time, it's actually appreciated. It increases in value. And not only that, there are various stocks that also pay periodic, perhaps quarterly or monthly dividend. They just pay you because you're actually investing in that asset class and you're a shareholder in that company. For me, I rarely ever buy Starbucks, and I know it sounds weird. Don't get me wrong, I do, but I rather, for instance, just to give an example, I feel a lot more happier when I use that money and buy a share of a Starbucks company as opposed to going and buying a cup of Starbucks.
Yeah.
Now, I love Starbucks, don't get me wrong, but I think it's a change in mindset. And not everybody can be like that. But for me, I'm a lot more comfortable doing that because I know that money is actually going to help me create more money. My money is working for me as opposed to I'm giving the money to Starbucks. But I'm glad a lot of people don't think this way because otherwise Starbucks.
Yeah. So Mostafa, I've been really hyped up and excited when you start talking about, stocks and dividends and all those stuff. But, from my own research, right, because I've been trying to dip my toe in this kind of stock market waters and everything. I also know that it's a more advanced or later steps in your personal finance journey, and it does, of course, high risk come high reward, right? So if you have those kind of reward and returns from the stock market, there's risk that comes with it, right? So you've been talking about, we should we should think about investing in the stock markets and getting those returns. But what would you say some of the first few steps that one should take, especially someone young like me, before they dip their toe into the stock market, and how should they optimize their situation to make sure that they already take on the challenge as well as get those rewards while minimizing the risk and the danger of the stock market?
Absolutely, it's a great question, Nick. I think knowing what I know now, probably my advice to the people who are not familiar, the youth who are not familiar maybe with that much with investing and are interested because they hear a lot about it, but they don't know how to start. I think the most important step is probably educating yourself and learning some of the basics. We talked a little bit about the YouTube channel that I started. It's called Momentum Finance and Stock Investing. Momentum is Moementum, and that's a wordplay. My name is Mostafa. I go by Mo, and I thought, I love to encourage people. I like to motivate people and give them the momentum to get started, because a lot of times it's always hardest up until the time that you start. Once you start, and same goes for your podcast channel. You start, and over time you learn from that experience. Same goes with the world of investing. You have to start somewhere, and that starting probably step would be learning about it more. So essentially, there is a video on this channel that is 25 minutes. It's called Stock Market Investing for Beginners. I encourage you to go and watch that. It's a summarized version of a Wealthsimple masterclass, which is almost an hour. If you're interested, you can go and check that out. But in simple terms, it tells you what is a stock, why stock market investing is actually a good way for anyone who has a longer term time horizon, especially for many of our youth, to put some portion of their money that they don't need immediately and build it over time. I think getting started with that by educating yourself is so important. And there are tons of resources out there. There are books on investing. There are books around financial discipline. There are a lot of great YouTube channels. I myself even follow a lot of great YouTubers out there. Graham Stephan is definitely one of those. Jeremy in Financial Education, he has 3 channels now. He's, again, one of those great guys you can listen to, and they talk about different pieces of investing. If you're a beginner to investing, though, my advice definitely would be don't necessarily go and pick a stock. You can definitely get educated, start opening an account. Ideally, take advantage of the registered account that we have in Canada. We have tax-free savings account and registered retired savings plan. Those allows you to invest without having to deal with taxes or any of those matters. And then from there on, maybe consider investing in a broad range of stocks through index funds. Index funds, essentially what they do is you don't have to go and pick a different company, and instead you invest in a broad-based stock market. As if, imagine, and you can start with as little as even $2 or $5. Imagine, Nick, today you say, you know what, I have $2 in my pocket, or rather than going and buying something with these $2, why don't I invest in my future? Why don't I put this money towards my future and put that to buy a portion of a a stock, in this case, index funds. So with the beauty of an index fund is that you don't necessarily have to buy a big chunk. You can even start with $1, $2. It doesn't matter how big or small it is. And over time, as you progress and as you see your money grows, I think that gives you that drive and momentum that you want to maintain what you're doing, essentially.
Wow. What do you think of that advice, Paul?
I definitely agree. I think we talk about learning by doing in scouting. So just to bring it back to scouting, right? Learning by doing. You can always play those like stock games, and you can always, I tried to when I didn't have as much money, but I was interested in the stock market. But at the end of the day, put something in there, and whether it's index funds or choosing your own, I think being invested is kind of part of the learning experience, right? And putting it in something that has a longer time horizon and that maybe you shouldn't be touching for short-term consumer gifts and things that we talked about earlier. It's about habits, right? It's about habits. As long as you get in a habit, $5, $10, $20, when you start getting experience, when you start learning how to use this war chest of investment, you're that much more prepared and capable. Because if you're 30 years old and you have no savings and you're like, okay, I'm going to design a saving now. Well, it's not that it's too late. It's just that you have nothing to invest. Even if your intention is good, if you didn't save up properly and if you didn't put money in the market, you can't take advantage of the wealth and knowledge that you have now. I definitely agree with that approach.
That's so true. Those habits are so important, Paul, as you mentioned. And the best way of building those proper habits is, of course, getting started, and at the same time, perhaps getting started with avenues that are a little bit, personally, I would think it's better to start at two avenues that are less risky. And I think index fund is probably a very good avenue to get started with. I know a lot of, I'm not sure if any of our listeners are familiar with one of the, Jim Cramer, who's actually the host of the show Mad Money. He used to be we call it as almost like the term kind of escaped my mind.
Like fund manager.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Paul. He's actually used to be one of the famous fund managers, not anymore, but he provides a lot of great advice in his shows. But essentially, even him, and he loves stock picking, even him, he believes that majority of investors are better off investing in index funds. It's a passive way of investing. You're not going to necessarily get the highest return, but even that return of average of, let's say, 5 to 6% is a lot better than what you would have got from the bank, investing in the bank accounts. So I think it's a good way to get started. Over time, you educate yourself, you learn. For me, I remember when I didn't know much about stock investing, but I was interested, I almost played the game in my head and I jotting down some notes. So I went up and looked up the companies that I was interested in and knew about, let's say Starbucks or Nike or whatever you name it, and looked at what is the stock price for that company at this time. And I would just play a game and say, hey, what if I bought one share of this company? Or what if I bought $1,000 into this company? And I did check back in a week. This was all hypothetical, but at least I would know, or did I make that right decision or did I not make that decision? And am I ready for that? If I'm not, then that just tells you maybe you shouldn't just necessarily put your money and buy a stock because you're not ready for it yet. You could still perhaps invest through an index fund, which is a lot less volatile and allows you to kind of diversify and lower your risk.
There's two parts here, right? I think the first part is obviously the behavior and like just saving or investing or putting money away that's not put towards consuming, right? I think that's the first point here. I think we got to get young people into that mode where they're saving and they're not spending as much. Because I think people are. And you bring up Jim Cramer, and I've been watching some of his stuff recently. And this is on MSNBC. Nick, if you want to catch this guy, Jim Cramer. Some people don't necessarily agree with his approach. Like he's very loud and kind of general in certain areas. But
seems like my type.
his recent take actually is this. And when it comes to investing, it does. It used to have a lot more to do with if companies were actually making money and margins. And you can go look up your basic finance 101 course in terms of what the company is doing with the money that they're making or money that's being invested with them. But his take recently was that right now, because of how easy it is for people to buy stocks, it's made it much more transparent and much more there's less barrier to buying a stock. Before you had to call somebody, 50 years ago, you call someone, they get the price and you purchase, and it was very cumbersome. But now you can go on your phone, right? And you can actually buy part of a share with an app like Robinhood in the States. So in the States, you can buy fractional shares, and we won't get into that. for this channel. But basically, it's allowing people who normally don't have the capital to buy a certain share to basically crowdfund a way to buy a share. So it's people like myself, maybe a little bit. I mean, I have a bit more finance background, but it's people like, the population, the young population. Jim Cramer was saying that they're driving the stock prices, not through fundamentals, not through financial savvy, but just through like how you feel about a certain product industry, because it's those products that are actually making a lot of money. So, okay, let's put the habit. Okay, let's assume everyone is now saver stuff, right? So maybe we'll go towards the stock more if they want to use stock picking as their avenue of investment, right? Because there's different ways you can buy antiques, you can buy bonds, you can buy real estate. So let's go towards the stock investment, because I think that's what your channel is more focused on, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
How would you, maybe as a young person or even today, decide which investments to choose, which stock investments to choose? Maybe that, Nick, does that help answer some of your questions?
Yeah, I'm just gonna jump in before Mustafa gives us his wisdom and everything, right? Maybe we should have discussed this or say the sentence first before we jump into any of this conversation. But to our listeners, out there, please do your own diligence. We are not telling you which stocks to buy. We're discussing, we're offering suggestions and everything, right? But at the end of the day, right, the one who's gonna reap the rewards from the stock market or kind of earn the punishment is you, right? So make sure you do your own diligence, right? And we
Look at
hope.
Nick being. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and we hope that you will make the wisest and best choice for yourself. Okay, so now Mustafa, so give us your wisdom.
No, that was a good disclaimer, Nick. Yeah, and I think that's one of the ones that definitely we should put out there. So thanks for clarifying that. I think so. I'm hoping I answer your question. Probably I'm not going to necessarily mention a lot of stock names, but definitely trying to give some pointers in terms of what I think. And this is solely my perspective, and as Nick mentioned, it's for entertainment purposes only. With all the jokes aside, I think one thing I want to mention is, I think, Paul, you touched on this. It's so important that anyone who's interested in investing, make sure to have your emergency fund. And there's a lot of research on this. By emergency fund and how much it should be, they usually talk about something between 3 to 6 months of your expenses. So part of that is making sure you budget. So make sure, I think, to get started, but probably this is one of the first things that I do encourage anyone to do. It's so important. As you go through your life every day, as anytime you spend something, whether it's through cash, credit card and whatnot, make sure to keep track of it. I know there are different apps that do that for you, but the other way is just simply you can have a pen and paper. Do this for at least a month, ideally longer, but even at least a month. Then this is a chance for you to come back to that list, review that list, and know, where did your money go to? What are the categories? For example, 20% of your fund or your expenses was related to groceries. Maybe a big portion was from accommodation because you're renting, or maybe transportation, whatever that is. This really gives you a chance to, as Paul mentioned, take a moment to reflect on it. Is this the best use of your money? It's your hard-earned money. You're working so hard for it. So do you think this is really where you want your money to go to? Are there opportunities for you to perhaps cut some of those expenses? This is probably one of the more important steps for anyone to do. And then through that exercise, I think it gives you a chance to perhaps even set some targets for yourself. I know targets is not something like everyone likes, but I think it's important. We do that for our own household. And Paul, you were asking earlier on, for example, how has it impacted my lifestyle? Obviously, for example, because we are doing the budgeting and we go through our expenses, we notice, for example, our grocery expenses have gone up. But now it gives us that visibility, and then we can make a deliberate choice. Are we comfortable with that? Or do we want to perhaps cut on some of those costs? So I think that's so important. Make sure you do that. And as you go through that exercise, you know how much you're spending per month. Now it's multiplied by 3 or roughly 6. That number is how much you should have invested in, not invested, but you should have it saved, perhaps in a bank account or wherever you feel that it's safe for you to hold on to it, because that money is there in case something, God forbid, happens, that you need the money. If you lose your job or if suddenly your sources of income is no longer there. So it's important for you to have that emergency fund. Now, moving past that, if you have an emergency fund, the next step is for you to decide on, if you want to invest, what is your time horizon? And it's, again, so important. imagine you have a $5,000 left over that it's not part of your emergency fund, or even $1,000, and you want to invest it. How soon are you going to need this money? Are you going to need this maybe in the next 1 to 2 years? Let's say if you want to buy a car, hopefully not, or buy a house, much better decision. In that case, maybe you don't want to necessarily invest it in the stock market. Or if you are, you're probably going to invest it in some sort of stocks that are less volatile, that you're not going to necessarily lose that money, because you're going to have to withdraw that money right away. But if your time horizon is longer, especially if you're younger, then I would encourage a lot of our young listeners to get educated. But after that, if you don't need their money for the next 5 to 10 years, I would probably consider investing in more riskier stock options, as long as they have the stomach for it, as long as they're comfortable seeing the money that they invested actually going down in the value. If you're comfortable with that, then probably that's a really good option for you, because you're going to reap the benefit long term.
There's a lot. I think there's a lot to consider. I think for our listeners, it's very important that you educate yourselves through, watching your videos or doing their own research, because these things are always changing too, right? Like, just because we talk about this now today,
Exactly.
6 months from now, it could change. So, being very open and aware of your investments and investing in general, I think it's an important part of being a good investor. Like, I did put money in, say, a mutual fund 10 years ago, my RSPs. I took it out recently because it wasn't gaining or it wasn't losing that much, but it wasn't, I wasn't getting value from the investments I was put into. And I felt that if I did it myself and put into things that I felt I believed in and do some of the light research, we could get equal or greater gains. Because sometimes fund managers or investments are so broad. They cover, they're kind of mutual funds, especially, right? They cover a large group of people that is not specific for you. So there's a benefit there for you to do the type of research you've done, Mostafa, to find out what's the best investment for yourself, right? Is that fair to say?
That's so true.
So I know we had this point before, and maybe, and I distracted, and I apologize for that, but we were just going through a story about your YouTube channel and your personal finance journey. So I'd like to get back to that, because I think that will explain for us a lot of how that has, one, affected the way you're approaching finance now, right? But two, it's also like, okay, so if I'm not sure if you're getting any of this in your comments in YouTube or anything like that, but like, why should people listen to you? Or like, what do you feel like you bring to the table that they couldn't get from like their banker? So maybe tell us a little bit more about kind of that story. How did you get to the point where you are now, and what do you think your value proposition as a finance YouTube person comes to play?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. That's a great question. So I started my channel with the Momentum Finance and Stock Investing back in March of 2019. So it's been about 1.5 years. There are a couple of reasons why I started that channel. I think the most important reason, though, is I definitely, and over years, I grew that desire and interest in the topic. So I thought, if I kind of challenge myself and do this research and have to make videos, it gives me another opportunity to share it with other people, hopefully do my share in terms of educating others. And through that sharing and learning, you learn a lot as well. I'm sure probably the same experience through this podcast. You're having different guests, and through that conversation, we all learn from each other. I'm actually learning quite a lot from this conversation itself. So having said that, I think that was definitely one of the major motivations for me why I wanted to get started with that. The other one is, YouTube, of course, has an option whereby you can monetize over time. And there are a couple of criteria for that. Of course, you have to have at least 1,000 subscribers, and within a year time, you have to have at least 4,000 hours of watch time on your videos. So I'm glad to mention that, of course, our channel is monetized. It actually got monetized in August, right before my wedding. So that was probably one of the
wedding gifts
from YouTube. I was excited about. Other than that, of course, it's something that as I put more effort into it, I do see how it's actually giving back in terms of both monetary aspect, but also in terms of how my subscribers are growing and how my subscribers are actually connecting with the content. I go through each and every comment that is provided on the YouTube videos and respond to them. There are many of the audience in my YouTube channels that actually I know now. We've connected several times through the comments. Funny story, actually, one of the individuals they actually contacted us by email, and we almost became friends, and we actually even talked over the phone. And this individual is actually now living overseas. But I guess you make some of those connections, and you want to do it more because you see how you're bringing value to your audience and to yourself. You learn through that experience. The reason I say my channel is perhaps what's the value proposition for my channel is the fact that unlike probably several famous YouTubers where they have millions invested in the stock market, or they have ton of real estate invested, I'm still probably newer to this whole field. I'm not necessarily from the richest family, but I'm pleased with how through determination, through hard work, I could get to where I am today from humble beginnings, and also I have a vision for where I want to be in the next several years. I do want to hopefully get to a point that I can retire early. The whole concept of the FIRE, the Financial Independence Retire Early movement. I'm pursuing that, and I'm hoping that through my journey, I can inspire other people who are probably like-minded and maybe don't know where to get started. Hopefully, I can provide them a couple of thoughts and inspire them to also get started.
So I mean, we were talking earlier about your financial disposition, like your disposition towards your personal finance. So was that at the same, were you always thinking like a YouTube channel back then?
Yeah. So I'm going to be honest with you. Maybe one of the key drivers for that was as you watch other people making YouTube videos. So of course, the finance topic is key to my core right now. I can tell you for sure. I love it. I can't go one day without checking how the stock market is doing. I just love it so much. Nonetheless, the more I watched different YouTube, and one of the ways I educated myself was watching other people. And you try to get perspective from different people. You just don't blindly listen to them and go buy a stock. Of course, that's never how I've done it. But I've listened to them. And as I mentioned earlier on, and a little bit of promotion, I know he doesn't need the promotion. Graham Stephan, he has close to, I think, over 1 million subscribers. He's very famous as a YouTube world, in the world of finance. And I think one thing that he does so well is he tries to make it so simple for everybody. So he always talks about generic topics. So obviously I watch his videos, but he even reflected on how he started. If you look back to his first video and how basic it was, pretty much recorded on a cell phone, holding onto his phone like that and recording that, and where he is today in just a matter of 3 years, and his transformation, that to me is just so inspiring. To me, I'm all about continuous improvement and improving yourself. And I think that's just the ultimate way of how you can grow. And I love making videos. I love editing videos. That's always been a side passion of mine. And I thought, well, why am I editing videos for all these other people as part of my other consulting jobs that I have, side hustles? But why can't I spend that same time and do it for myself? What's the worst that can happen? Nothing. The worst thing is going to happen, at least I'm going to make those videos and I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to watch them one day when I have my own kids. I'm going to show them, hey, you know what, look at this, what I did. And hopefully that's going to be inspiring to them. So that's the type of motivation that I had. But of course, knowing what's the potential. If you grow as a business, it could turn into a very solid side income as well. So definitely I look forward to that as well. And the best way to do that is by providing quality content. And that's what I'm aspiring towards. What
has been your challenge with okay, so maybe we're shifting more to the YouTube aspect of it. So what challenges have you seen in terms of running a finance? Like, where do you do your research from a finance perspective so that you can actually, kind of speak to the topic, maybe not necessarily be a finance fund manager point of view, right? From just a regular everyday investor point of view. What has been your challenges in doing the research, and have people kind of like called you out and like, hey man, that's not the right thing to say?
It has happened a couple of times. Like that's happened a couple of times that, for example, someone may have commented on a video and quite disagreed maybe with the approach. And I think that's one of the learning lessons as well, is that when you get started on your journey, and whatever that journey is, whether it's starting a YouTube channel, whether it's starting a new project, whether it's starting a podcast, or even editing a video, whatever that is, don't get discouraged, because keep that in mind. Take that criticism with a grain of salt. Try to listen to it, of course, and see if there is anything that you can learn from it. I think that's really important, because to be honest, we got some feedback back then as maybe there was a background music to this video that it's too loud, and it's a very valid feedback. Well, yeah, you have to balance it out. There are, of course, some feedback that maybe you don't quite agree, and while you respect their opinion because that's their research, they have done their own research and they have their own perspectives, we agree to disagree on certain things, and that's fine. I guess that's really a key takeaway for me. One thing I find sometimes challenging, and I think I have to remind myself always, is that at least in the YouTube world, sometimes you have to overcome the temptation of talking about the stock or an investment topic that is the hot topic of the day, because if you make a video on it, probably you're going to get more views on, versus picking a topic that you're more comfortable with, you have really done a lot more research on. So that's a temptation that I personally sometimes struggle with. So if I kind of get tempted to work on topics that are the hot topics, I try to still do my proper research and provide my own perspective on that topic, because I think my viewers are watching the video because they're perhaps interested in not only about the topic, but also hopefully what unique perspective I have on that and what's my take on what's my interpretation on it.
Okay, I've been sitting here and absorb all of these nuggets here and there, right? So for any listeners out there, feel free to pause and replay all of this part right here, because I think there's a lot of stuff that you can learn every time you re-listen to it. And somehow, right, one of the things that I kind of realized, right, after all of these talks about YouTube, comments, and learning about yourself, like why taking the editing side hustles to, serve for yourself, as well as tying back to Scout Post, talk about investments, all of that. I think it's that all of us will agree that investing in yourself is kind of like the safest and the most rewarding way to get returns, right?
I couldn't say it any better than what you just said, Nick. Absolutely true.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what it is. I think you're absolutely right. The investing in yourself is probably the only type of investment that returns all the time. You're not going to disappoint if you pick the right field, of course, right? I think it's a very good way. And be mindful about it. Know what your passions are in life. What is that one or two things perhaps that you are most excited about? And is there a way that you can turn that passion into a business potentially, or something that you can perhaps earn some income from it? You talked about video editing. That's something that I'm passionate about. Building on that, I started my own company, and right now I provide services in terms of video editing, social media marketing, and digital marketing. And I love it. Don't tell my boss necessarily, but I dare to say I love it perhaps as much as my day job. I love it. The time I spend on that is almost perhaps the best reward that I'm providing to myself, because I'm learning, and as the more I do it, the better I get at it. So it's just incredible how over time you can build your own skills, you get more confident in terms of what you're offering, and you learn from that experience as well.
So Mostafa, you were saying earlier, between your 20s and your 30s, like, right? So was there a trigger, you think, or would you think it was just because I remember you having like that entrepreneurial mindset early on, right? I mean, even though, we're just trying to find some stability at the time when you first came to Canada, was there a trigger like from working in Canada for a little bit, doing different jobs, and then, making that big move? Like, was there a trigger for you to have this shift in investing in specifically, or do you think it was more gradual, like just through like even the world? Like I got interested in certain things because, for COVID, for, like even the podcast things, because there's just so much more media. Was it a gradual thing for you to get into finance and investing, or was it always like you were doing it when you were younger and then you just had the time and capability?
No, I think
on.
Good question, Paul. That transition to really getting more serious in terms of getting to the investment world per se I would say it was a gradual, and it wasn't even at the time I started with investing. So officially I started in Canada, buying my first stock through an index fund back in 2017. So
okay.
So I almost lost 3 years in between. I was investing through mutual funds, of course, banks, which for any listeners out there, you might disagree, but I never ever recommend a mutual fund. Keep in mind, whatever area that you invest in, keep in mind the cost that you're paying for it. Well, a lot of times that's the thing that a lot of times we don't even think about. Mutual funds are good because you have a fund manager who's investing your money for you, and it's good because, or maybe you don't have the knowledge, but know what's the price that you're paying for it. You're easily paying 2+% for that, whereas to Paul's point, now there are a lot of alternative ways of investing, whether it's passive investing or active investing, where the fee is a lot less. Like there are passive investing options out there that only charge you 0.5%, and 0.5% compared to 2% may not sound a lot, but over the span of a long term, like over a span of 20 years or 30 years, that can easily span out to almost maybe $500,000, depending on how much money, of course, you've invested. Of course, keep that in mind. Now, just to tell you maybe transparently how maybe even immature maybe I was, even when I initially started my investing back in 2017. So I started investing with Wealthsimple. Wealthsimple is a Canadian brokerage firm that makes it so simple and easy, as the name says, to get started investing. You don't need to have any knowledge of investing whatsoever, as long as you're disciplined and have the right mindset. You can open an account, any type of account with them. So I opened a tax-free savings account with them, and I started putting $5. Over time, more money. And there came a point where initially I had up to $500 invested with them. And because my mindset at the time was not the greatest, the stock market, of course, was volatile at the time. And I remember my money, the value of my money went down. Let's say I had $500 invested and it went down to, let's say, $380. So I lost a little bit in that process. Keep in mind, that loss is unrealized loss. What I mean by that is you're not losing anything. It's just on paper. You're only losing it if you start selling what you have. Like if you don't sell anything, you're not losing anything. Same goes, of course, for your gains. If you haven't sold anything, you're not ripping any gains. So I contacted Wealthsimple and I was very pissed with them. It's like, what's this supposed to be? I'm supposed to make money. Why is the case?
Yeah.
And I mentioned to them, I'm actually considering to close my accounts. Let me know how I can do that. Like to that point.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I got the response that I got from Wealthsimple. And they got back to me with an article. The link to an article, they said, this is part of investing. You've got to be comfortable with your ups and downs. But read this article, because what they said is that essentially what I mentioned to you. You haven't lost anything until you sold it, and you have to be diligent. And probably the best advice that I got was, when your portfolio is doing poor, if you're investing in the broad market, that's the best time to invest more. And that's the lesson that I learned ever since then. If the value of your stocks go down, think about it. The stock market is being presented to you at a discount. If the value of the index fund goes down, it is being presented to you at a discount. And over time, you're going to really see how it's going to be to your advantage. So back in March, when the stock market was really down, that was the best time for a lot of investors to invest. And even though at the time you invested in the stock market as a whole and you didn't know nothing about picking the right stock, since March until now, in a couple of months, your value of the investment would have probably gone down by easily, I would say 40 to 50%, easy. And I say easy, it's not as easy because you have to have the guts and belief and the mindset that, well, you know what, I trust that it's going to come back. And I've come to that realization right now. I wasn't there back in 2017, and I know many people are not even today. But it's just by going through that education and getting to the right mindset, I think you build that. And the sooner you do that, the better you are set for your future. So
do you still have that Wealthsimple account?
I do. In fact, I do. And I actually grew it to close to $50,000 to $60,000. And then we recently bought a house, so we had to withdraw money from it. But I'm still keeping that account. I'm still putting money into it. Right now, because I know more about stock investing, I tend to also invest actively, meaning I pick stocks too. Yeah. But I'm still trying to build a habit that every day, probably the most fun thing that I do every day is just I open my Wealthsimple account and I go to invest and I just say, you know what, let's put $5 into that account. And I make those impulse decision is not for buying something, but rather investing in my future. And I love it because the app actually shows you, hypothetically speaking, this $5 that you put now over the span of the next 30 years, it actually grows to almost $100. Can you imagine you put $5, but in 30 years, it's going to grow to 100 years. Who wouldn't love that? I love it. it just makes me excited even now as I'm talking about it.
Yeah, I can definitely hear the enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Nick, do you have any thoughts? I feel like we've gone through a lot. We could go so deep into the type of tools to use. So I don't know if we want to talk about tools. We want to talk about individual investments, which might be a bit too much.
I think we touch on a lot of stuff already, right? Indirectly or directly.
You want maybe ask me a couple of recommendations in terms of books or maybe some resources to things like to educate. I think education piece probably is the more important one.
Yeah.
For you. I want to hope.
Yeah. So so I think summarizing, I think it's been a crazy journey for you. It's really good to hear, actually. Like, I agree with Nick, like just to hear, how you approach the YouTube, how you approach your finances, just taking ownership, I think is really cool that you did that. So how did you kind of get to this point in terms of the resources you use, what's been working for you, what maybe didn't work for you? How would you tell our listeners regardless of age, how would they go about doing what you've done in this area?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I think one of the key pieces is really trying to grow an interest into this topic and really realizing why it's important for you to spend time to know more about it. You can start always with easy resources that you don't have to necessarily spend. I can assure you, I have not necessarily signed up for any paid courses whatsoever. There are a ton of free resources out there that you can watch, you can listen to get educated. I can give a couple of examples of you on YouTube. I think I talked about it. There are a number of channels that you can follow along and listen to and get educated. One other one that I don't think I mentioned is this one's called Our Rich Journey. It's a young couple they're American couples. They are doing very well, and they actually have now emigrated to Portugal. They lived there on a fire journey. They quit their job in their early 30s and with their 2 kids, live in Portugal. And they tell you a lot of great story how they got started. So, well, of course, as much as I encourage people to watch and subscribe to our channel, Momentum, I don't want to discriminate. I think there's a lot of great resources out there that you can watch and listen to. There are many great podcasts. Paul and I, we talked about the Mad Money. It might be a little more advanced, so it may not be, perhaps, you may not follow along exactly everything that they say, but there are a lot of still great things that you can pick up in between. If you search for different finance podcasts, you might land on a couple. Maybe listen a little bit to them and see, do you resonate with them? Do you find that you're learning something from it? Then you can just continue to subscribe to them, and they're free. A lot of libraries, they have books and podcasts. There's an app called Hoopla, Hoopla. It's actually linked to libraries, various libraries in Canada, whereby you can actually download any ebooks, not any, but a lot of different good ebooks and podcasts, and that you can access, or even audiobooks. You can actually access audiobooks, and that's one of the things that I love about audiobooks, because sometimes when you are perhaps doing something on the side, and maybe you don't have to focus too much, it's a maybe repetitive task, you can even listen to the audiobook on the side and learn something from it. That's another resource that I would recommend. And feel free to ask your friends and colleagues for resources, because for all we know, they might have come across some resources. Do your own due diligence, though. Don't ever buy a stock just because you have a good feeling about it. That's never the right way to buy a stock. With that, I thank you so much for having me on this show. It's been a blast. It's a great chance for me to connect with old friends, and also with Nick, getting to know you a little bit better. And of course, I feel privileged to be on this podcast.
No worries. Thank you, Mostafa, for taking your time here with us today. So just one last thing, reminder for all of our listeners out there: if they want to reach out to you or find you online, where are the platforms that they could best reach you at?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So the YouTube channel, if you go to YouTube, they can search for Momentum Finance and Stock Investing. Momentum, I repeat, is MEMENTUM. But more easily, if you can just type in you can just type in youtube.momentum.ca, and that is directly taking you to the YouTube channel site. If you're interested on Instagram, we are also on Momentum Consulting. It can be the same spelling. And happy to answer any question. If you're interested, you can follow us along, and more than willing to add to our followers and subscribers on the channel. We're trying to build a community of like-minded people who are passionate about the topic of investing, financial discipline, and financial planning, and hopefully collectively we can learn from each other.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
Scalpo, you want to add something?
No, that's great. Thank you, Mostafa. And well, we'd love to have you back if this thing takes off.
Yeah.
I'm sure it will. You guys are doing an amazing job. Great job. I think I would definitely be interested. Like I said, there are a lot of brilliant minds in the Scouts group that I would love to hear from them. I've learned so much from the group and you, Paul. So definitely love to hear that. And I think same thing goes for anything that in life you start, right? Same goes for my YouTube channel. As long as you guys are passionate about this and you find it fulfilling, trust me, there are definitely people out there that are going to feel the same. It's just a matter of you have to give it a time. You don't have to get disappointed if it doesn't grow as fast as you want. Sometimes we have to have that patience. If you are patient and you pursue, you're going to definitely succeed. It's a replicable model. Other people have done it. Joe Rogan has done it, Paul. So.
Okay.
Yeah. We already gained 1 subscriber right here, Scalpo.
Yeah, well done. You know what Scott John used to say? 1 subscriber at a time, right? One number at a time. Okay. Let's enjoy the rest of our Sunday. Thank you, guys. Anything else, Nick?
Send my best regards to the crew, and thanks again. Have a lovely weekend.
Thank you.
Have a lovely weekend.
Bye.
Bye. This podcast is a project created by the 180th Pacific Coast Scout Group, where we create awesome leadership and management training program for 18 to 26 years old. If you want to learn more about us, check out our website and social media accounts, link in the description.
Oh,
my breathing still. Oh my